Hello everyone and welcome to the next lecture of Silk Road Chapters project, and today we will talk about Arabs, the origins of Islam, how Arabs came to the territory of Central Asia and brought Islam with them here, and how all of that led to the period of history which is called Oriental Renaissance. Of course, at first we'll talk about the origin of Islam as the religion. Islam appeared far away from Central Asia on the territory of the country which is now called Saudi Arabia, and is connected to the name of the Prophet, whose name was Muhammad, Magomed, Mahmud. In the different countries he's called differently, and also that period of history is connected to two places, Mecca and Medina, which still can be found on the map of the modern Saudi Arabia. Muhammad was born in 570, and the first 40 years of his life had really little connection to the religion, as his main occupation was trading and traveling with caravans. But in 610 he got the revelation from Allah, and since that time he's considered to be the prophet of the new religion. But don't think that from the very beginning Muhammad had a lot of followers. On the contrary, in the first years that he became a prophet, he had only several people who were following him and who accepted Islam. And on the contrary, when Muhammad was trying to preach Islam on the streets, on the squares of Mecca, it was quite a dangerous situation for him, because new religion wasn't accepted. And only because Muhammad had some powerful relatives who could protect him, he was avoiding some major problems with the local authorities, with the local population. But finally in 622, Muhammad, he had to escape to the place which is now called Medina. Now at that time it was called Yathrib. And 622 is the beginning of the calendar of Muslim people, which is called Hijra. Hijra literally means escape. And Muhammad, he lived in Medina for several years, and only in 630, 2 years before he died, he was able to come back to Mecca, as he already had a lot of people who supported him. And that's how, when he died in 632, it was already clear that the new religion is not going to disappear with its prophet, but is going to be spread to many other territories. When the Prophet died, in the history of Islam for several decades was an epoch of so-called righteous Caliphs. So who is Caliph? Caliph, technically he is a substitute of the Prophet who unites the religious and administrative power. Why the first Caliphs, first four Caliphs were called righteous? Well, because they were the closest relatives, friends and supporters of Muhammad, of the Prophet. And during the time of the third righteous Caliph, Osman, in the middle of the 7th century, well, actually you can call him Atman, Uthman, it depends on the country. So anyway, at the time of his reign, Quran was finally codified as the book, and since that time nothing was changed in the holy book. After the death of Muhammad, the expansion of Islam continued, but at first it was quite a slow process. And during the time of the reign of the dynasty of Umayyads, they intensified the expansion of Islam to the new territories. That's how it came to modern Syria, Iraq, and etc. So that's how Islam slowly it was coming to new territories, and that's how in the end it became one of the world religions. The conquest of Arabs continued, and by the age of the 7th century, they reached Central Asia. When Arabs for the first time appeared in the suburbs of Samarkand, it was actually quite a small group of warriors who came to the territory for reconnaissance, but unfortunately they were all killed there, and the leader of that group was Qusam ibn Abbas, who was a cousin of Prophet Muhammad, so the close relative of the Prophet. He also was killed there together with his troops, and that's how now in Samarkand we have a very famous necropolis which is called Shakhi Zinda, where we have the grave of the cousin of the Prophet Muhammad, and which is one of the main places of pilgrimages in Central Asia. At that time, Central Asia was the part of the big cultural and political world. For example, Sogdians in Central Asia. They were also famous for being cultural brokers on the Great Silk Road. So their cities had libraries, temples, schools, and also the writing system was used along the Great Silk Road. So this means when the Arabs for the first time came to this territory, they came to the place with the deep cultural tradition, developed agriculture, and also very developed urban life. The first contact in the suburbs of Samarkand and the death of that small scouting group, it only meant the beginning of the long-lasting process of communication between two civilizations. But the active conquest of Central Asia began in the beginning of the 8th century when the big army of Arabs came here with Qutayba ibn Muslim as their leader. Qutayba was a very talented general who by that time already conquered a lot of countries. Finally, Arabs managed to conquer Samarkand, Bukhara, and even Tashkent. And it took them several decades, but finally they put under their control the territories of Sogdiana, of Bactria, of Khorezm, which is now the territories of northern Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and even the part of Kazakhstan. Don't think that for the Arabs it was easy to conquer these lands. No, on the contrary, the locals were really fighting back as they didn't want to accept the new rules, new religion, new lifestyle. One of the most famous commanders who fought against the Arabs was Devashtich, and he ruled in the city which is called Penjikent. Now it's a territory of Tajikistan. Now Penjikent is a big archaeological site, but in the 8th century it was a big prosperous city which was very active on the Great Silk Road. Devashtich was fighting fiercely with Arabs, but finally in 720 they managed to take over him, and the city of Penjikent was destroyed and never came back to life. But even when Arabs conquered Central Asia, it was not easy for them to spread Islam among the local people. It took them from 150 to 200 years to make the majority of the population Muslim. It was a quite slow process as, of course, the locals, they didn't want to accept the new religion because before Arabs came, they had their own religions, they had their own lifestyle, they had their own traditions, and etc. And of course, they didn't want to change that easily. And the smart thing that Arabs actually did, they got in contact with the local aristocracy and local noble people. And this is actually a very widespread thing in the world history. When the first changes, they start with aristocracy and with the rulers. So we can speak not only about the religion, but also about the clothes, about the food even. And when the ordinary people, they look at their rulers and they see that the rulers, oh, they accepted the new religion, then probably this religion isn't that bad. And that's how they were turning into Islam more willingly. That's how Arabs started to influence their society here, firstly through making elites and aristocracy to become Muslim, and that's how then these rich people, these elites, they became the role model for the ordinary people. Still, it was a long process because before Arabs came here and brought Islam with them, in this region we had a total tolerance of the religions, so people could believe in anything they wanted. That's how here we had Zoroastrians, we had Christianity, we had Buddhism, we had pagans and some other religions. Still, for Muslims, the tolerance wasn't acceptable as one of the main reasons why they were invading other countries was to spread Islam as far as possible. And that's how only by the probably 9th century, the majority of people here became Muslim people, and it's still the predominant religion in this region. In some remote regions, such as, for example, Badakhshan in the modern Tajikistan or the steppes of Kazakhstan, the pre-Islamic beliefs, they lived well up to 11th or even 12th century, especially if we talk about everyday life. So a lot of rituals about like childbirth, funerals, wedding, a lot of them kept the pre-Islamic features in them. That's how even when the people became Muslim here, they still kept some of the details of the previous religions. And that's the reason why in Central Asia the culture of Islam, it's so colorful, it's so vivid, because it absorbed a lot of elements from their other lifestyles. Still, one of the most common mistakes that people make when they think about the spread of Islam is that Arabs wanted to make all 100% of the population Muslim. It's not true, because first of all, Muslims, they paid less taxes than non-believers. And the main tax that infidels had to pay was called jizya, and it was a kind of the, let's say, permission to be non-Muslim in the Muslim society. So they were paying this tax and they could proceed following their own religion and their own traditions. This tax was making quite a big part of the income of Arabian Caliphate, of Arabian state. That's why Arabs, they didn't really want to make everyone Muslim in their states. Plus, the Muslim people, they had to serve in the army, and very often Arabs, they just didn't need so many people in their armies. And plus, to that, Arabs very often they didn't trust the young people from these new territories that they invaded, as of course they were scared that these newcomers, let's say, they could betray them or leave them in a very crucial moment during some battle. That's how in the Muslim world, in the Muslim states, they were always quite a big part of the population which were not Muslims. For example, we can say like Copts in Egypt, or Christians in Syria, or even quite big Jewish societies in the cities of Central Asia. In fact, the taxation system under Arabs was quite a sophisticated system. Apart from jizya, this tax for non-Muslim people, there also existed another two main taxes. One of them was zakat, it's like a charity tax for Muslim people, and another was kharaj, which was a land tax. And very often, if the rulers of some countries, they didn't want to convert into Islam, they were allowed to preserve their religion if they agreed to pay really high taxes and to support their Arab administration. This flexible approach really helped Arabs to control their territories and to avoid a lot of rebels and also maintain peace in their lands. I already told you about Devashtich, but the most famous local leader who fought against Arabs, it was Muqanna. And the struggle of Muqanna against Arabs lasted for around 20 years. Muqanna, it's his nickname, which means covered with the wheel, because according to the legends, he was covering this face. It was not just a small rebel, no, it was a big war, and the headquarter of that war was the place called Kesh. Modern name is Shakhrisabz. It's located 70 kilometers to the south from Samarkand. Finally, when Arabs managed to conquer that fortress, the city, they totally destroyed it, and even more, it was prohibited for Arabian scholars to mention that place, the place of Shakhrisabz. And Shakhrisabz was only reborn with the reign of Timur, who was from that city, and he ordered to reconstruct that place. Muqanna's rebellion is sometimes called the last big resistance against Arabs in the pre-Islamic times. So the army of Muqanna, it included a lot of Sogdian wars, even Buddhist monks, some mercenaries from the steppes. The siege of Kesh, it was really brutal. We know about the families who had to escape. We know about the people who were killed. But Muqanna became a very popular figure, and for the local territories, he is considered to be one of the national heroes. If we speak about the administrative system of the Arabs in this region for the first 100 years of their reign, well, they always were sending someone from Arabian Caliphate to rule this country because Khalif, he wasn't trusting any of the locals. And but then after some time, Arabs, they started to think that probably it's better to make someone local to rule the country, as the subjects would trust him more, and he would also understand better the situation here in the region. But of course, that ruler, he had to be Muslim. Yes, infidel couldn't become the ruler, so he couldn't be Christian or Buddhist. And that's how the first Muslim dynasty of this region, they were Tahirids, but it's not much to say about them. And after Tahirids, in the end of 9th century, comes the time of the probably one of the most famous and glorious dynasties in the local history, the dynasty of Samanids. The most important thing about the reign of Samanids was that in the 9th century it was a period of time when started so-called Oriental Renaissance. What is Oriental Renaissance? It's a period of history not of Central Asia but in the whole Muslim world, when we can see the rise of different aspects of life of people and art and culture and trading and poetry, literature, music, you name it. And this period of time, it lasted from the 9th century till the beginning of 13th century, when the Mongols, together with Genghis Khan, they came to the territory of Central Asia and they destroyed a lot of cultural centers. Surely you know the word Renaissance, but of course the majority of people, they associate that word with Europe and later period of time, but the Renaissance here in the Orient, in Muslim world, it started earlier. So what was the reason of that Oriental Renaissance? Well, actually at that time the conditions were simply perfect, because firstly the huge piece of land, so let's say from Central Asia to Saudi Arabia and up to Europe, it was united as one big Arabian Caliphate, which of course was making very easy for the people to travel from one place to another place. Also Arabian language, it became the lingua franca, which means everyone spoke Arabian language, especially if you were scientist or scholar. And that's how the scientist, let's say from Samarkand, he could easily go to the madrasa in Baghdad and study there and don't feel himself the foreigner. Students in that madrasas could study theology, law, literature and other sciences. Very often libraries were attached to the mosques, and some cities even had the book markets. Also the paper making, which came here to Central Asia from China, made the books more available, and this helped the ideas to spread all around, not only state of Samanids but in the other parts of the Muslim world. Plus the Samanids, they also encouraged the translations of the old books, not from the Greek language but also the books from China and from India, for example, which also helped to bring the new ideas into the scientific life. Central Asia is well known for its representatives of Oriental Renaissance, especially if we talk about scholars and scientists. For example, one of them was Al-Khorezmi. You can hear from his name, Al-Khorezmi, that he was from Khwarezm. Al-Khorezmi is the founder of algebra. Also from his name, Al-Khorezmi, comes the word al-Kharitm. So he was a famous mathematician. Another person is Al-Beruni. Yes, probably in the Western world he's less famous than Al-Khorezmi, but still he is one of the main representatives of Oriental Renaissance. He was more scholar than scientist because he studied geography, history and other things. And for example, he was the first one to construct a round globe as the model of Earth. So imagine, long before the Europeans in 10th century, the people in Muslim countries, they believed and knew that the Earth is round. But probably the most prominent scientist who comes from the territory of Central Asia, not far away from Bukhara, was Avicenna. Avicenna is the Western version of his name. Here we call him Abu Ali ibn Sina, and he was a famous doctor, so he worked in medicine. He created a book which was called the Canon of Avicenna, and this book was widely used by doctors not only in Central Asia but also in Europe. And even more, just to impress you, after the invention of printing machine in the 15th century, the book of Avicenna became the second book which was printed after the Holy Bible. Apart from secular disciplines, the Muslim disciplines also were well developed here, and one of the most famous scholars which comes from his territory was al-Bukhari. Again, you can hear from his name that he was from Bukhara, and he was the man who studied hadiths. What is hadith? Hadith, it's a story about the life of the Prophet, but not like a fairy tale, but it's a real thing which happened to the Prophet, his opinion on some things, for example. Of course, hadiths, it's a very important source for everyday life for Muslim people. So for all his life, Al-Bukhari, he collected hadiths, and finally he created a book where he collected around 8,000 hadiths, and now this book is considered to be the second most important one after the Holy Quran. Imam al-Bukhari wasn't the only scholar who studied hadiths in Central Asia. One of his contemporaries, al-Termizi from Termez, he also studied hadiths. And actually, when the scholars, they were studying hadiths, they applied very, very strict rules. For example, they checking the reliability of the narrators, comparing different versions, and even analyzing the linguistic patterns to make sure that this very hadith is authentic. This actually gave a lot of respect for the Muslim scholars of Central Asia all around the Muslim world, and still their works are widely used in the universities from Cairo to Jakarta. Muslim scientists and scholars, they studied a lot of the books of their non-Muslim colleagues, like for example ancient Greeks. There was no any kind of disdain towards the non-Muslim scientists and scholars. On the contrary, when in Europe there was so-called dark times, when anything which was not religious was not approved or even destroyed, here in Muslim world there was the Oriental Renaissance, and a lot of Muslim scientists, they studied the books of European scientists, and they translated them, they were getting some new ideas from there. And even more, after the dark times in Europe were over, a lot of the books of the, for example, Greek scientists in translated version, they came back to Europe thanks to the Muslim scientists and scholars. Thanks to that translations, the works of Plato, Aristotle, Pythagoras, Euclid, they became the part of Muslim curricula. But scholars, they didn't just translate, they also built their own ideas on the top of the ideas of the ancient scientists. For example, the Muslim astronomers make the corrections of the Greek calculations based on their own observations. Even in music theory, the scholars like Al-Farabi studied and worked on rhythm, instruments and sound. That's how altogether the Oriental Renaissance, it wasn't just about copying, no, it was about finding the new ideas and also pushing the science forward. Even though Islam arrived in Central Asia over a millennia ago, but don't think that it remained the foreign religion imposed from the outside. No, slowly it became the part of the local life, even the everyday life. You can still see the legacy of Islam in the layout of the residential quarters, in the blue domes of mosques and madrasa, in the rhythm of the holidays of Ramadan and Eid, and also in the way families and communities interact between themselves. At the same time, Islam here always had its unique flavor. It absorbed the elements of the other religions like Zoroastrians, like Christianity, like Buddhism, also pagans and many other beliefs. Islam became a key link which connected Central Asia to the wider Muslim world, from Cairo and Baghdad to Delhi and Istanbul. Craftsmen, scholars, scientists from this land were really welcomed in the other parts of the Muslim world. Plus, the students and merchants, they were bringing their new ideas and technologies from the other parts of the Muslim world. Islam helped the region to stay connected to the global intellectual and cultural movement for centuries. Today, all 5 countries of Central Asia recognize Islam as a part of their heritage, but they also uphold their secular constitutions. Religion is practiced freely, but within the state laws. You can see the young people who go to the mosques and the others, they don't go to the mosque, but both of them, they feel themselves the part of the same culture. This balance between tradition and modernity, faith and pluralism is one of the key things to understand the life of the region. In the end of this lecture, I would like to say that even though Islam came to the territory of Central Asia more than 1,000 years ago, it still remains the main religion of this region, and it still had and has a very big impact on the local culture, art, architecture, and lifestyle. And we can see that impact in the life of all 5 stands: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. But please don't forget that even though Islam is a predominant religion here, still the society is officially a secular one, and that's how in this region we have a freedom of the religions, where you can choose any religion or don't follow any. It's up to you. If you enjoyed this lecture, please like, share, comment, and tell about us to all your friends, colleagues, and relatives, and see you next time.